Hello, and welcome back to lesson 3 of our series on how to build a marketing data warehouse with Supermetrics. In the first lesson, we set up the foundations of this project. We learned how to connect data sources in Supermetrics. We learned what is necessary to configure BigQuery to be the destination of our data. And we ran a test transfer to confirm that everything we've done so far was working. Then in the second episode, we learned how to clean up after ourselves. We deleted the test transfer in Supermetrics. We deleted tables in BigQuery that will enable us in the future to maintain a clean setup of the data warehouse. And finally, we spent a lot of time learning how to create custom tables in Supermetrics and then configure the actual transfers for our production environment. In this third and last video of the series, we will cover the basics of building dashboards with Google Looker Studio. We will connect Looker Studio to the tables in your BigQuery marketing data warehouse, and I will show you a few basic ideas on how to structure your dashboards and what to watch out for when you create calculated fields in Looker Studio. As a reminder, we are still modeling a e-commerce data warehouse use case. We are pretending to be a mid-sized e-commerce business that is transforming their data landscape from a spreadsheet-based reporting setup to one that is way more scalable and unlocks additional reporting use cases with the power of a data warehouse fueling the solution. Starting out with a clean plate on Looker Studio, this is what you will probably see when you log in the first time. An empty homepage with a few Google Analytics templates that Google has produced and is offering up. We want to create a new report from scratch. Before we can do that, we need to connect Looker Studio to BigQuery in order to be able to use the data that we have stored there. For this, it's important to take a moment and discuss the two different ways that Looker Studio uses data sources. There are embedded data sources and reusable data sources in Looker Studio. The embedded data source is when you go straight from here to create a new report and then select a data source from there. In our case, we want to create reusable data sources. The difference is that reusable data sources can be reused for different reports under the same Google account. In order to create a reusable data source, we can go to the Create button at the top left and select Data Source from the menu. Here we are presented with a bunch of Google connectors that Looker Studio supports natively. Since our data is stored on BigQuery, we select the native BigQuery connector. In this menu, we have to find the BigQuery and Google Cloud project where our data lives. Chances are that it's either already shown in this list, or you need to manually search for the name in the case that it doesn't appear already. Once you select the correct project, you will be presented with the number of datasets that are available in this BigQuery project. Remember, the dataset is the place where we told Supermetrics to write tables to. So selecting the dataset from the list, we should now see the tables that our transfers have been busy writing into BigQuery for us. We create a connection to an individual table for each data source that we are configuring. So I will go ahead and create the first connection to the Facebook ads table here from that list. Once we click on the Connect button, Looker Studio loads up the table's content and shows us the list of fields that are available in this table. This is looking okay for us now. You can also see at the top left here that the scope is now marked as reusable, which is exactly what we wanted to achieve. You can now go here and click Create a Report, which will open a new tab in Looker Studio and automatically pull up an empty report that is now connected to the data source that we've just created. Looker Studio will also automatically try to load some data and show it to us right now. We can ignore that at the moment. We can now continue to connect the remaining 2 tables as data sources to Looker Studio before we move on and begin building reports with them. As you can see now in the Data Sources tab in Looker Studio, the 3 tables are now available as data sources and are connected here. Important to note is that I have just connected to the plain tables without any alteration to them. Looker Studio also lets you connect to tables via a custom SQL statement. You can find this option during the create process when you click on the data source, BigQuery connector, select your project. You will see in this view there is a custom query option. In here, you also select the project first. But then you have an editor that lets you write a SQL query that allows you to granularly select the data that you want to have in the data source. We are not going to use this in this example. But as your data warehouse grows, this can become an interesting option if you want to limit access to certain data in a data source. For example, if your table contains information on multiple ad accounts and you want to have a data source that contains data for only one of the ad accounts, you could use the custom query function for that. By default, the data sources that we have created in Looker Studio will have the names of the tables in BigQuery. In some cases, these names can be quite cryptic, especially for end users who are not familiar with the data warehouse setup that you've created. If you want to make these data sources a little bit more user-friendly, or especially when you're going to use the custom query function to limit the amount of data that is in a data source, you want to rename those probably. Renaming is easy, as the option is available through this menu here. And we can just do that here to give this a bit clearer names. This menu also holds the option to share this data source with other users in your organization that are only Looker Studio users, but not necessarily users of your data warehouse environment. If you want other people to be able to create their own reports with these reusable data sources, this share option will enable them to do that. So now that everything is prepared, let's move on to creating the actual report. From the Looker Studio homepage, we can now either create the report from the plus menu on the top left, or in the Reports tab, we can create a new report down here. Upon creating an empty new report, it prompts us to connect to data. We can now select the available data sources that we've just created from the My Data Sources tab, where everything will be listed. Let's start with the Google Ads campaign data. We add the data source to this report. Looker Studio again creates the first table for us, just to confirm that it is able to load data from this data source. Most likely you want this table to stay there, so you can just go ahead and delete this. Most likely we want to also use more than one data source in this report. You can add additional data sources to the same report via the Add Data dialog up here, which brings up the same menu as before. Now that I have added all three data sources to the same report, we can see that they are all listed under the Data section on the right-hand side of the window. Clicking on one of them expands the selection and shows you the available list of fields from this particular data source. Let's talk a little bit about visualizations next. Looker Studio offers a wide variety of built-in visualization styles. To add one of them, you go to the Add a Chart menu at the top. This drop-down menu offers up the whole list of visualization elements, and you get to choose which one you want to use on your dashboard. The most popular ones are the ones at the top. So let's start with those. I like to start each dashboard with a line of scorecards that give the user an overview of aggregated information at one view. So select a scorecard from the top and place it freely on the canvas. We can now see that the default selection that Looker Studio chose is the record count. It's not necessarily a bit of information that you want to keep on your dashboard. So let's change that. On the right side, we now have a chart option menu that shows us all the configuration details for this particular chart type. The first menu item is the data source. So we can see right now that with selecting the Facebook Ads data source that we have added to the report. If we wanted to change this to the Google Ads one or Google Analytics 4, we just switch the data source from this menu and we're ready to go. Let's keep Facebook Ads active on this one for now. Down the menu, you get to choose the metric that is being displayed and a bunch of other specific options to this particular visualization element. Before going into these details, I'll want to create copies of this scorecard so that we can have the whole layout already done, and then we can fine-tune them individually. So now that we have 3 scorecards on the canvas, let's edit them to display useful information. You can do this by changing the metric in the menu here to something else. So let's say for Facebook we're interested in the clicks first. And you can see how quickly it refreshes the data to display the clicks. Another way of changing the metric is by simply drag and drop from the data menu on the right-hand side onto the pill in the chart configuration menu. So if I wanted to have the total cost next to the clicks, I could as well just pick from here and drop into here. Finish this off by selecting the number of actions as the third item. There are more options of fine-tuning scorecards, but I will leave it at that. Each chart element in Looker Studio also offers some styling options. I don't want to dive too deep into those, but for some basics, for example, if you don't like the metric name as it is by default, you can edit it by going to the pencil icon here and then entering a different name, which will replace the default value. There is an entire style tab on this chart element that gives you far more fine-grained options to change anything about how this element looks. Change the font color, font type, spacing, everything. You can go really detailed if you want to. So now that we have some aggregated information on this dashboard, let's put in a time series chart to show a bit more depth and trend information to the user. We'll go to Add a Chart, and from the menu we pick the time series option. We can place it on the canvas as before. We can drag the window to resize it. And the way Looker Studio has chosen the default is already a useful chart. It's showing us the development of clicks over time. The time series chart has different options than the scorecard, as it's more versatile. The most important ones here are the breakdown dimension and optional metrics that you can add. Being a time series chart, it automatically selected the date field as the breakdown dimension that is primarily used. If we wanted to add additional dimensions to this, we can drag them onto the breakdown dimension. For example, I might want to split this data up by its campaign name. This gives us time series for each campaign that is in our data set, which can be quite useful to compare campaigns with each other. The optional metrics option lets you add additional metrics to the chart that the user then can choose to switch to if they want. The primary metric is going to be clicks, but if I want to add actions as an optional metric, the chart becomes more interactive. The user can then go to the chart and select the optional metric from this and switch to it. So now the chart is displaying the number of actions over time for each campaign in the dataset. This functionality allows you to add and enrich your dashboards with more data without overcrowding the canvas with too much detail. It's a good use case if you want your users to be engaged with your dashboards and interact with them over presenting static information. And it can foster a culture of interacting with the data and working with it rather than just receiving it. So we've just scratched the surface of visualizations, and there's way more in Looker Studio than I can cover in this video. One important aspect that we have not touched on yet is the ability to filter and control the data that is being displayed on the dashboard. So let's cover that next. To add filters to your dashboard, go to the Add a Control panel at the top. This drop-down menu gives you a plethora of options on different kinds of filter elements to add to your report. The first one that I always add to my dashboards is the date range control, which is a global view-wide element that controls what date range is taken into account for every element on the plane. You can select it from the menu and drop it into the canvas anywhere you want. A good place is top right corner. The setup is fairly simple. Now this is a drop-down menu that just lets the user control what date the report is supposed to display. If you click on it, it will display this calendar view, where now you can select any range you want. You can also define its default behavior, so the amount of data that is being displayed without the user interacting with this filter element at all. You can change this in the setup menu, in the default date range. Here, you can either select a fixed date range for this report to be displayed as its default, or, probably more useful, select a automatic relative date range, something like this month to date. Another useful element to add as a filter, especially for reports that dive deep into campaign optimization and their metrics, would be something like a filter on specific campaigns. Let's do that next. Our time series chart is maybe a little bit crowded because it's displaying all the campaigns in a dataset right now. Let's fix that by adding a filter that lets the user control what campaigns are displayed in that chart. For this, I will choose another drop-down, but this time we will just use the generic drop-down list filter element from the top. I want to place this next to the chart so that it's visually indicating that this filter is influencing the chart next to it. Looker Studio just did an amazing job at guessing what I mean by that. So it picked the campaign name as the default selection for this filter. Right now, this filter is actually going to impact every element on this page. So if I change the selection in this filter, it's also going to change the values in the scorecards. This might be a conscious decision to have this behavior, but I actually want it to just impact the time series chart. In order to do that, I need to group the filter and the chart together so that they form one unit. You can do that by selecting both elements and then right-clicking so that you can select the group option from the menu. With this, we've just created a group of elements. So now, once I change the campaign from this menu to be only one, the chart reacts to that and now displays only that campaign. And if I wanted to compare this campaign with another, I just add it to the chart through the menu, and it's as easy as that. Now, as a final point, let's talk about calculated fields. If you want to calculate metrics or KPIs that are made up of more than one base metric, something like cost per click, I recommend you do this within Looker Studio, because that way you can ensure that the calculation is performed accurately, whatever breakdown of data you choose in your visualization. And you don't have to worry about making sure that you're using a weighted average or any other complicated way of calculating it for each chart. Looker Studio will take care of that for you. As with many things, Looker Studio has multiple ways of doing this. The one I would recommend is embedding the calculated fields in the data sources themselves. So let's take a look at how to do that. If you ever want to go back to your data sources and make changes to them, you can go to the Resource option from the top menu and go to Manage Edit Data Sources. This brings up the menu of all the data sources that are currently used in this report. It's actually a quite useful menu because you can also see how many charts are using which of the data sources that are added to the report. In here, we can go to Edit a data source, which brings us back to the list of fields that are available from this data source that we saw when we added it to Looker Studio in the beginning. You might have seen it before. There is a button to add fields to the data source at the top. We'll be using that now. We will select that and add a calculated field here. This menu now asks us first to give it a field name, so let's do CPC, and then wants us to enter a formula. If you want to have a comprehensive overview of what formulas are available in Looker Studio, there's a documentation on the internet by Looker Studio themselves that lists all the formulas and functions that are possible to use. Most of them overlap with what you might know from Google Sheets or Excel. I don't want to dive into too much detail here. We will do a simple metric. So we just need to divide two values. In our case, that will be the sum of all costs divided by the sum of all clicks. Looker Studio confirms that this formula syntax is valid. And with that, we can save this calculation and its definition and embed it in our data source, so that whoever uses this data source now, in case you shared it with your colleagues or you revisit this data source in the future building a new report, this calculation and its definition will be baked into the data source within Looker Studio. This is a great way of centralizing formulas and logic on how to calculate custom KPIs within your visualization and analytics layer. Let's finish this edit process up, close that menu, and confirm that CPC is available. In the Data tab on the right, we can now see that there's a new value down here listing the CPC. And if you highlight it with your mouse, you can see that it has this FX label next to it, which means that it's a function that we've edited manually. You can do a quick scorecard to confirm that the CPC works. And there you go. We have a CPC. So in this video, we've learned a lot. We've covered the basics on how to connect data sources and tables from BigQuery to Looker Studio. We've also learned the difference between reusable and embedded data sources. I've told you a little bit about the many visualization options that Looker Studio has, how to configure them, how to change charts so that they filter to what you need. We just scratched the surface, but with this knowledge already, you have everything you need in order to build your own reports. From here, you can explore some of the layouting options that Looker Studio has. Really make your dashboards shine by adding custom graphics, additional elements, and explore some more of the visualization chart types that are available. If you wanted to get some inspiration on what your Looker Studio dashboards could look like, Supermetrics has a gallery of free-to-use reporting templates that I invite you to visit and take a look at. This report here, for example, is something that with the skills we taught you over the last 3 videos, you can actually build yourself. Even though it might look very different to what I've built during this lesson, it's just expanded upon the same concepts with a bit more visual flair and design elements attached to it. It's a report that combines multiple data sources into one dashboard, has multiple pages per data source, digging into various granularity levels of data, and it offers a comprehensive overview on your marketing data and would empower you and your team to make the next big steps in your marketing strategy. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you liked it. I wish you a lot of success and fun on your marketing data warehousing journey. Bye for now.